And government summit being held, as you can see, South Africa assuming the chairship of the African continental body. There you see in your picture, Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa, taking his seat. Remember, this is the second time that the chairship of the African continental body is now in South Africa's hands. Let's listen in.
I take this opportunity to thank President Abdel Al-Sisi, the outgone chair of the AU, and I guess my first task is to call upon Cyril Ramaphosa to deliver his acceptance speech. Your Excellency, President Abdel Al-Sisi, the outgone Chair of the African Union, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellency Moussa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Commission, Your Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Honorable Mohammed Shetea, Prime Minister of the State of Palestine, representing President Abbas, Your Excellencies, former heads of state and government, heads of the AU organs, heads of regional economic communities, commissioners, and the AU Commission, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, and fellow Africans. I stand before you immensely humbled by this great honor that has been bestowed on South Africa to chair this august body that represents the unity of the people of Africa. On behalf of the men and women of South Africa, I graciously accept your collective decision that I should chair the African Union in 2020. In executing this weighty responsibility, I will rely on your continued support, your wisdom and cooperation. I will especially rely on the help, the wisdom and support of the newly elected members of the Bureau. I want to thank our host, Nobel Peace Laureate, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, the government and the people of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia for the excellent hospitality extended to me and my delegation since our arrival here in Addis Ababa. I also want to thank my brother, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, for the outstanding and commendable manner in which he presided over the work of the African Union during his term of office. We say thank you and thank you for all the work. As South Africa, we first chaired the African Union following the historic relaunch in South Africa in 2002, when President Thabo Mbeki, who is here with us today, became the chair of the AU. We are deeply humbled by the confidence you have invested in us once again. Your Excellencies, we are mindful of the weighty mission that we have at hand. But we are also mindful of the weight of history here in Ethiopia, a place with such deep and profound connections to Africa's ancient past. Up in the highlands of the north of Ethiopia in the 1st century, Our ancestors tamed the harsh terrain and established agriculture, herded livestock, minted their own coinage, created their own alphabetical script, built towering monuments that stand even to this day, and also forged expansive trade routes across the region. In the passage of time and in the context of time, our forebears understood that true progress and development could be advanced through trade and working together. Today, we stand on the cusp of the greatest step towards continental unity since the founding of the Organization of African Unity. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area that we adopted last year will enable us to work together through intra-Africa trade, as it will reignite industrialization and pave the way for Africa's integration into the global economy as a player of considerable weight and scale. It is the realization of the dream of our forebears to see the rich resources of our continent being marshaled for the collective benefit of all Africans. Indeed, we are a continent that is rich. Africa is rich in natural resources, yes, but also in history, in intellectual output, in culture, in a sense of humanity, and in human capital. As Africans living in this new era, we shoulder the greatest of all responsibilities to ensure that our wealth as a continent does not become our poverty, that our blessing does not become our curse, and that our endowment does not become our downfall. It is to us that the task has fallen to build an Africa that is prosperous and at peace with itself, an Africa that is capable of achieving the aspirations that this august body set out in Agenda 2063. An Africa connected through a vast network of roads and railways, enabling the free movement of goods, people, and services. An Africa whose vast tracts of land support agriculture, commerce, and livelihoods. An Africa whose rivers are harnessed to create power and electricity, electrify villages, towns, cities, homes, and businesses. As incoming chair of the AU, we have set ourselves key priorities to enhance the progress that is already underway during the African Decade of Action. We would like to deepen our work together in ensuring that the unity of our continent is solid and is based on the founding principles that our forebears crafted, and advancing the economic growth and sustainable development that our continent needs. Our collective work to ensure political and economic unity, good governance, and peace should be strengthened by supporting integration, industrialization, economic development, trade, and investment. And in pursuit of this priority, we will host the 13th Extraordinary Summit on the AFCTA to be held back-to-back with the Extraordinary Summit on Silencing the Guns in May 2020, and I will talk about the silencing of the guns in a little while. Working closely with President Mahamadou Issoufou of Niger in his capacity as the AU champion on the AFCTA, We will work for the finalization of the outstanding issues with regard to this agreement. We must all ensure that the AfCFTA does not become a conduit for products with minimal African value addition to enter and penetrate our local markets under the guise of continental integration. There must be a reasonable standard set for what constitutes a product that is proudly made in Africa. We have to level the playing field for African businesses so that they are able to operate in a large-scale market unfettered by regulatory fragmentation. This is an integral part of rebalancing global trade relations. The era of colonialism and imperialism, under which Africa is a pit stop in the global assembly line, has passed. The success of the AfCFTA depends on infrastructure development. We must all drive the implementation of the Presidential Infrastructure Champion Initiative so that priority and high-impact projects act as catalysts for the implementation of the AfCFTA. Beyond trade integration, we have trained our sights on supporting green growth on the continent and on ensuring that the continent takes advantage of the opportunities that are presented by the green transition. This includes new industries in energy, materials engineering, the circular economy, sustainable agriculture, and clean production. The fourth industrial revolution presents our continent with great opportunities. The uptake of digital technologies will lead to improved competitiveness and provide fresh opportunities for inclusive growth. Millions of our continent's young citizens are digital natives, and we must drive a skills revolution to enable Africa to take a quantum leap into the economy of the future. To give full effect to our attention to this important area of work, we should establish an Africa Artificial Intelligence Forum to also include those who are in the diaspora. Your Excellencies, in this year that we conclude the decade of African women, we must advance women's economic and financial inclusion. But we must also address the scourge of gender-based violence that is so rife on our continent. We want to focus on ensuring that there is accountability to global gender commitments. We have heard the calls of the women and the girls of Africa for liberation from the shackles of patriarchy, violence, and economic exclusion. We recall the words of the Egyptian novelist and activist Nawal el-Saadawi that women are half the society. You cannot have a revolution without women. You cannot have democracy without women. We intend to work closely with President Akufo-Addo of Ghana to ensure the interests of women are mainstreamed, and want the years 2020 to 2030 to be declared as the decade of African women's financial and economic inclusion. I believe that the work of the Pan-African Women's Organization, PAWU, an organization that was founded in 1962, a year before the founding of the OAU, to promote human rights and gender equality should be recognized and should be strengthened and be resourced so that it can play its rightful role. We have to find more practical and sustainable ways of empowering the women of our continent so that we move beyond the cliches and the general statements that we pronounce on podiums every time. Public and private procurements offer great opportunities as they account for 30% of the GDP of many countries on our continent. Agenda 2063 calls for the allocation of at least 25% of public procurement to be for women-owned businesses, yet women-owned businesses are given less than 1% of procurement. We need to change this. It is not unreasonable to advocate for preferential public procurement legislation to advantage women-owned businesses and for the establishment of preferential trade and customs regimes for women. It can be done, and we must do it so that we empower the women of our continent. The representation of women in decision-making structures in government, parliaments, and other sectors is far too low on our continent. The women of our continent want and demand to occupy their rightful place in all decision-making structures. They deserve, at the very least, 50% representation on all structures. Those amongst us who have enabled the participation of more women in decision-making structures can testify that they have benefited immensely from the inherent wisdom, insights, and capability and energy of the women who participate in those structures. The women of our continent want to play a meaningful role in developing our continent. Let us not hold them back. We will support the good governance and democracy agenda, leveraging the excellent work of the APRM that we have been asked to chair. We now have 40 member states that have joined the APRM. We will engage those member states that have not yet ratified to do so with a view to achieving universal accession by 2030. We will make a contribution to promote peace and security in our collective effort to silence the guns. Through the AU Peace and Security Council, the AU Commission and the collective membership, we will focus our efforts on conflict resolution across the African continent, especially those experiencing protracted conflicts. We will work with President Denis Sassou Nguesso in his capacity as the chairperson of the AU High-Level Committee on Libya to convene an intra-Libyan conference to promote ceasefire and dialogue. We will continue to work with the parties in South Sudan with a view to implementing the outstanding issues of the revitalized agreement in order to pave the way for the formation of the Government of National Unity. South Africa will also host the Extraordinary Summit on Silencing the Guns in May 2020 to look at the implementation of the AU Master Roadmap and at the same time respond to emerging circumstances on the African peace and security landscape. The summit that we will hold must come up with the real actions that we as Africans must take to end conflicts and deal with acts of terrorism that are raging in many countries and regions such as the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and now spreading to other parts of Southern Africa as well. We must also deal with the actions of other countries outside of our own continent that are fighting proxy wars and fueling ongoing conflicts on our continent. The principle of finding African solutions for African problems must be our overriding theme in addressing all the conflicts on our continent as we work within the frameworks of the AU and the UN. During our chairship, we will champion positioning our continent as a strong and resilient global player. It is therefore an imperative of the time that as Africa, we continue to assert the primacy of multilateralism in world affairs. We must continue to advance this through bolstering the AU's relationship with the UN. Our collective fortunes rely on international cooperation and in ensuring that we leave no one behind. That is why the African Union should continue with its support for the struggles of people elsewhere in the world that still suffer under the yoke of oppression. Today, we reaffirm our unwavering support and solidarity with the Palestinian people in their legitimate quest for an independent and sovereign state. We also reaffirm our unwavering support for the independent and sovereign state, as well as the right of the people of Western Sahara to self-determination. I'd like to say, with regard to the US-inspired plan for the Palestinians, that as I listened to it and as I read everything that's written about it, it brought to mind a horrible history that we as South Africa have gone through. That the apartheid regime once imposed a Bantustan system on the people of South Africa without consultation with them and with all the oppressive elements that that plan had. As I listened to the Arab League and as I listened to our colleagues from Palestine, it sounds like this plan, one, has not been consulted with all the people that matter, especially the Palestinians, and it sounds like a Bantustan type of construct. We must ensure that our independence and freedom as the peoples of this continent should be universal. As the internationally acclaimed musician Jonas Gwangwa sang, "Freedom for some is freedom for none." Our international cooperation must extend to the continental effort to address also the climate crisis. As chair of our work on the climate change, South Africa will prioritize all three global goals in the Paris Agreement, namely mitigation, adaptation, and support. Our union, as I conclude, stands as a testament to the power of political unity. Let us now resume the onward march towards economic integration, development, progress, growth, and shared prosperity. Our continent is definitely on the ascent. It is indeed a regeneration, as described by the South African revolutionary Pixley Kaisa Kaseme. Let us build the Africa that we want. Let the guns be silenced. Let our swords be beaten to plowshares and our spears turned into pruning hooks. It is the actions that we take from this day onwards that will determine our continent's destiny. If we pursue our objectives with diligence and determination, and mobilize all our people to support them, I'm certain that ours will be a meaningful and effective and impactful union. In the words of the great son of the African soil, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, today is tomorrow's treasure. Tomorrow is the harvest of what we plant today. Fellow African leaders, we salute you. Through your leadership, you have sown the seeds for meaningful African unity. Let us now look eagerly to the harvest. We will, with all the actions we take to consolidate the unity of our continent, to foster the economic integration of our continent, to empower the women of our continent, and to silence the guns. Our people await the harvest of our work. As glorious is our past, so too will be our future. I thank you.
That all-important speech there by President Cyril Ramaphosa, who is now officially the chairperson of the African Union, giving that acceptance, or rather making that acceptance speech. And he vowed to ensure that the unity of our continent is solid, and he also vowed to ensure that he will embrace and uphold the fight on climate change as espoused in the Paris Agreement, and essentially echoing the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres' sentiments that he will also pledges to lobby the international community, especially the developed economies, to protect the interest of the climate. That was President Cyril Ramaphosa, essentially on behalf of South Africa, assuming the chair of the African Union. You are watching The Agenda on SABC News. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Simpiwe Ngwane. We'll have more news coming up after this break.